State of Florida versus Casey Marie Anthony. As to the charge of first-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty, so say we all. As to the charge of aggravated child abuse, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty. Dated at Orlando, Orange County, Florida, on this 5th day of July, 2011, signed foreperson.
But I know one thing. As the defense sits by and has their champagne toast after that not guilty verdict, somewhere out there, the devil is dancing tonight.
Hey, party people. It's Ashley.
And Bianca.
And you're listening to Creep It Real. Excuse me. Excuse me. We just wanted to start off by thanking everybody so much for your amazing response to our first episode of Casey Anthony and the Anthony Gang. We really got a lot of awesome feedback and a lot of people saying that they were hoping we were going to cover this case. So we just wanted to thank you guys for all your recent ratings and reviews.
And speaking of recent ratings and reviews, as always, if you haven't yet, we would love any positive feedback on the show through iTunes, and, feel free to share us with your family and your friends, because it really does help us to grow. And because this is such a huge passion for us, we would love to continue providing you with as much in-depth research as possible and truly make you guys the number one priority in our lives.
Yes, we'll put you before ourselves.
And that is saying a lot, because I put myself above a lot of things.
And this is perfect family discussion at Thanksgiving to break up all that nasty political talk. Just start talking about murders and kidnappings and Creep It Real.
That's what I do.
Yeah. So,
Now, without further ado, here is part 2 of our Casey Anthony series, the trial and the aftermath of one of the most dysfunctional families we've ever watched go through a trial, or really ever watched on TV.
I've never seen a more dysfunctional family. Even my own is less dysfunctional.
So now we are in 2009, and on January 23rd, police discover George Anthony, who had been text messaging family members, despondent and possibly under the influence of alcohol and medication, in a hotel room.
Give me a break, George.
Police also discover a lengthy suicide note.
Uh-huh.
At this time, the state of Florida also reverses itself and will seek the imposition of the death penalty, which of course is unsurprising for what is known as a red state or a Republican state, which it seems will almost always seek the death penalty. Let's not forget, Florida is also the state in which Ted Bundy, Eileen Wuornos were executed in. Yes, serial killers. Yes, different story. However, we're always seeking the death penalty in the red states. So, Judge Stan Strickland steps down after Casey Anthony's defense team files a motion accusing him of having inappropriate conversations with David Nichol, who blogged about the case. This individual was a writer. Strickland granted the motion because the accusation would, quote, generate renewed allegations of bias. Okay. Mm-hmm. And Judge Belvin Perry Jr. is appointed to take over the case, who will allow the state to seek the death penalty.
Killer. Not really. I don't know why. I have no idea why.
Cindy Anthony, in the later part of 2010, appears as a guest on the Today Show, where she calls Casey a victim and also claims she's not involved with what happened to Caylee's remains.
Okay. This is part of the reason why Casey is the way she is. Because Cindy Anthony is going around crying.
Calling her a victim.
Yeah, calling her a victim all the time, crying and boo-hooing. She just walks behind her, constantly playing a violin for her little privileged ass life that she was living. Like, oh, she has it so hard. Yeah.
George and Cindy Anthony's attorney, Brad Conway, then steps down because he disputes a Jose Baez motion claiming that Conway was given unrestricted access to documents belonging to Texas EquiSearch, to which he was not given the same access.
A little bit of drama going on.
Lots of drama. Here's some more drama. In April of 2011, we're now another year through.
Yeah.
After numerous outbursts of lawyers in court over what is and is not scientific evidence, Judge Perry ruled that more of such behavior would result in a fine of $100 per outburst, with the proceeds to go to the United Way.
Okay.
And God, what a circus this trial becomes.
Wow, man. They're just giving out donations left and right. Cool. That's actually probably the best thing that came out of this.
Yeah, I think that is the best thing. Who knows what, $100 per outburst? That's not much, but who knows how many outbursts there were.
There's an outburst jar just sitting there. What the hell?
Somebody just comes in with like $100 bill and is like, I'm going to make an outburst. Anyways. After 11 days of jury selection, Judge Perry swears in a jury of 5 men and 7 women, plus 3 men and 2 women as alternate jurors.
There's a lot of people there.
Mid-May, or mid-year, end of May, the trial finally begins in Orlando, Florida.
After like a year of all that other monkey business, or was it not a year?
Everything starts happening in 2008.
Well, that's when she was murked.
Not murked.
Or just dead.
So 2009, 2010, now we're mid-2011.
Okay. Oh, I'm already tired from all that.
It's a lot.
Okay, so the state says that they're going to charge Caylee with first-degree murder and 2 additional counts of aggravated manslaughter and aggravated child abuse, which seems to be a slightly questionable decision based on the lack of evidence that the death of Caylee was premeditated, in addition to the fact that Caylee clearly had no plan in place and was simply lying by the seat of her pants to get by day to day. But seeking the death penalty means that the prosecution gets a leg up in the trial because the jury is completely comprised of individuals who believe in the death penalty, as anyone who doesn't believe in it is eliminated from being a juror. So this typically means that it's a white male jury, which is less likely to question state evidence, and they have an 80% conviction rate, which typically benefits the prosecution. But in this case of a pretty white female being tried with pretty flimsy evidence, as we will show you today, I think this plan backfired on them fairly obviously, since she wasn't convicted of anything. And since the case has concluded, many experts have weighed in on the case and believe that the prosecution went with these charges to help them win for that reason specifically.
Now, the prosecution states Casey Anthony used duct tape to suffocate Caylee Anthony. The defense contends the child actually drowned in her grandparents' swimming pool, that Casey's father, George Anthony, warned Caylee she would be imprisoned for life for child neglect and then covered up the death. Thus, she failed to report the incident for 31 days. Also, because George Anthony had, according to Caylee, sexually molested Caylee as a child, she had a habit of hiding her pain and lying. Baez admits Caylee had fabricated the story of the nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, and also questions whether Roy Kronk, who found the remains, actually removed them from elsewhere, and question police motivations for pursuing a murder investigation, which I think is definitely a fair question, considering what Roy Kronk's son says later on in the trial.
Right.
Prosecutors call George Anthony as their first witness, and he denies to them ever having sexually abused his daughter Caylee or covering up the death of Caylee.
Right.
But a former boyfriend of Caylee's testified that she had told him her brother, Lee Anthony, sexually groped her in their adolescence.
Right. You know, not to make light of it, but she said he would try to touch her boobs all the time, apparently. Is that not an appropriate way to say that? Or you're just grossed out? Okay.
It's just gross.
It is gross. And some then questioned if Lee or George could actually be Caylee's father, since it was such an elusive situation. So,
in June, an FBI analyst states that the FBI did do a paternity test that showed that Lee Anthony was not Caylee's father.
thank goodness.
The prosecution then calls various friends of Casey Anthony's who testify about her fabricated stories during June and July of 2008 of having a job and employing a nanny for Caylee. A neighbor testifies also that in that time period of mid-June 2008, Casey and a boyfriend borrowed a shovel from him to dig up a bamboo root.
That doesn't sound like Casey.
Lying? It doesn't sound like her at all.
Oh, I meant doing any manual labor.
Oh, is she me?
I was about to say, like, who does she think she is over here? Doesn't she have someone do that stuff for her? So then the prosecution spent the first weeks dissecting those infamous 31 days in painstaking detail to the point where I'm really not even sure why they did it. Because in doing so, they interviewed countless character witnesses who were friends in Casey's life, who one after the other detailed a loving, caring mother who didn't go out much and spent much of her time at home with her daughter. And witness after witness gave glowing statements about her parenting, the love that she and her daughter had for each other, the bond that they had. And it was quite a surprise for me to read this when I started to research based off of what the media presented her as and what I had all along thought she was just an absolute shit mother who was never around and went out and partied all the time. And I'm not saying it excuses what happened.
Right.
But
not that she didn't do that after her daughter went missing, because not that she was partying like crazy.
Well, yeah,
right. But I was surprised to read the character statements by witnesses also that honestly had no reason to defend her. It's not like they were her best friends and they're like, oh, that's my girl. I'll have her back. It was like random people who were like, oh no, she was a good mom.
Yeah. And as we'll get into, she definitely was, by all appearances, unless she just went home and abused her kid in private and no one ever noticed, she was a loving mother that spent a lot of time with her kid and wasn't really that worried about going out and partying.
Right.
But we'll continue. Russell Huchler, who was an alternate juror for the trial, gave a statement to the press after the trial was over, stating that they didn't show a motive of why, from their own witnesses, this really good mother killed her child. And then he explained that while her behavior in those 31 days was definitely off, from the prosecution's own witnesses, the only thing to take away was that she was a great mother, they had a loving relationship, and they provided no evidence to the contrary, aside from the obvious off behavior following her death. While there was the week and a half span during those 31 days where Casey was living with Tony and then Amy and was going out during that time, going to clubs and partying, quote unquote partying, every single witness stated that it was completely unusual behavior for her and it was typically far from the case. The only person who seemed to think that Casey wished she could party more was her friend Amy, who she went and lived with. And Amy had said some things about how Casey would be really bummed that she couldn't go out with her when she would agree to go out with her and stuff like this. And from all appearances, it seems like Casey just couldn't tell this chick no. And so she would make these elaborate scenarios where she would say, oh, I would love to go out with you. Yeah, I'm so excited. And then whenever the day came to actually go out, she would back out at the last minute and say, oh, I'm so sorry I can't do it. I have work I have to catch up on, or I can't find anyone to take care of Caylee.
Listen up. I've done that though. I've had times where I'm like,
hell yeah.
Last minute, I'm like, oh, I really kind of don't want to go out at all. I don't want to put on pants.
Right.
And then I'm like, I can't. Ooh, I forgot. When I was in real estate, I have to go open up a house tomorrow.
Yeah.
Ugh.
No, and I totally get that. But with Amy, it went to a point where it was weird. She even at one point had asked Casey if she would move in with her. She was like, hey, let's get an apartment together. And Casey didn't have a job, had no money. So she really couldn't do it. But she created this entire scenario where she told Amy that she was going to buy her parents' house from them, and then they were going to live in that house together. And it was this whole thing where she kept saying specific details to her, like, oh yeah, we're going to be closing on this day, and just crazy stuff like that. And then in the last minute,
something happened.
Yeah, something happened. I can't do it. And why would you go to such great lengths? And one more crazy example with his friend Amy is that Amy wanted her to go with her to go get a car in Jacksonville, and Casey was super excited to go, or acted super excited. Yeah, that'll be so much fun. Let's have a little mini road trip. And then when the day came, she called Amy and told her that her father had had a stroke and she couldn't go with her on this road trip, which was, of course, not true, and so dramatic and bizarre that you would say that.
That your dad had a stroke?
She went around her dad. You know, like, you would be able to talk to him about it and stuff.
Or notice that
he didn't have a stroke.
He didn't have a stroke.
I mean, all just to get out of going on a little road trip when you could have just been like, oh, I just can't go. You know, it's just like, what in the fuck is wrong with you, chick? But regardless, the reason I bring those things up is because Amy had testified that she felt like sometimes Casey would complain about not being able to find someone to take care of Caylee and stuff like that. And I really just think what it looks like to me is that she had a really hard time telling this girl no, disappointing her. She's a people pleaser, like we talked about. Her and George were both psychotic people pleasers who can't say no. And so it seems like she just kind of made this whole scenario to this friend Amy where it was like, oh gosh, I've got this kid. I just don't think that was quite what anyone else saw out of any of the situations that they were around her. So as we know and we have established multiple times, it's definitely inexcusable to not report your daughter dead or missing and to go around living your carefree life in the meantime. But what this prosecution's tactic of talking to witness after witness in painstaking detail, all who had nothing but good things to say about Casey, all it did was right out of the gate establish a narrative that Casey was a loving, caring, if not somewhat negligent at times, mother. So that didn't really start the prosecution's case off too great in general, let alone with the lack of evidence that they really had. But what's funny is I never heard any of this stuff ever, anytime anyone talked about this.
That she was somewhat of a caring mom.
That she actually was a mom.
I actually never heard that either until I started reading deeper into the trial and doing the research on my own. Every single thing I've ever heard about Casey Anthony was that she was always partying and Caylee was a hindrance to that type of lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. It's weird the way the media takes a side and just wants to run with it with all they've got. But it's definitely a lesson to be learned, everyone, because gosh, this is not the first time this has happened where I've been like, what the hell? And that's happening all the time, every day. So not to get into conspiracy theory territory, but just think about that when you're listening to
everything.
So anyway, okay, so ex-fiance of Casey, Jesse Grund, described her in his testimony as a chameleon who changed according to the interests of the people that she was with. Tony described her as the perfect girlfriend who was cooking, cleaning, and working tirelessly with him at his promoter job to help him be a success. There are countless accounts of her going out of her way to be agreeable, likable, and helpful. She was not only a compulsive liar, but she seemingly had a habitual people-pleasing problem, and the two seemed to go hand in hand. Jesse Grund also stated that he had no doubt that Casey would never intentionally harm Caylee, but that there were often times of negligence where she would become distracted on the phone or the computer, and Caylee would be left alone for some period of time.
Not great.
No, not great. Not great at all, because she's a little kid. And that's the age they can really get into some precarious situations.
Absolutely.
There was another friend that stated that there were multiple times at Tony's apartment where she would be concerned by the fact that Casey would be in a back bedroom and Caylee would be alone out in the living room for somewhat extended periods of time. And that, to me, is the answer to everyone's question burning in their minds is, what happened to this little girl? Well, her mom loved to be on the phone and was on the phone and the computer for hours and hours on the day that she died. You know, it's not that hard to figure out that some sort of accident is likely what happened here. While the media wanted to paint a picture of a young mother obsessed with partying to the point that she killed her daughter to do so, or that she was partying, and in that partying moment, her daughter was in some way killed or accidentally died. The timeline of events doesn't really allow for partying to have anything to do with the cause of death, considering that on June 15th, Cindy was with Caylee until she was put to bed. That was the day they went swimming together. And then according to Casey's phone record, she woke up sometime the next morning just before 8 a.m. and was at the house with both Caylee and George until his shift began at 3 p.m. And then at 4 p.m. is when Casey left to go to Tony's. So according to this timeline, something had to have happened to Caylee between the hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. And if you're going off of the cell phone and the computer records of that day, it is likely to have occurred in or around this 30-minute gap that happened from both the phone and the computer at around 2 o'clock p.m. So her obsessive phone and internet usage stopped for about 30 minutes. And that is probably when, let's just say, George was doing something and went and discovered Caylee had fallen in the pool and brought her out to Casey. And Casey is like, oh shit, hold my MySpace for a second.
Yeah.
There's my daughter. Let's figure out what we're going to do now because we're insane.
Right.
Yeah. Instead of just being like, let's call the cops.
Right. Let's call the cops, see what we can do. Maybe she can be resuscitated or anything like that.
Like what you were saying, they said that George said you would go to jail for life.
Yeah.
For negligence.
Yeah, for negligence. I don't know about that, but okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's how it works.
And
surely she's not that
that's
dumb.
That's the thing about George Anthony, is that he just seems very simple. Like he doesn't really know how the world truly does work.
He was a police officer, so you would think he would have some knowledge, but I mean, he just seems like such a dolt. Yeah. I don't know if that's a calculated move or what, but regardless. The prosecution said that Casey wanted to live the good life and included things like going to IKEA with Tony. I mean, really?
I mean, she needs to get those Swedish meatballs, dude.
That's the fucking only thing you've got there.
That's literally the only thing I have for IKEA. Like, I love their Swedish meatballs. And they have yummy food, and they have this really good cake there that's in the frozen food aisle. It's my mom's, like, favorite. And if she wants to, like, live the good life.
Like Casey Anthony?
Like Casey Anthony. She'll buy that cake and thaw it and serve it anyways.
But regardless, that's not living it up. They just keep talking about all these activities where it's like, I'm living the high life today. Going to IKEA.
Oh, you don't think IKEA is living the high life, dude? Oh.
Partying like a rock star. Like, come on. Okay, so anyway, so they included these IKEA trips and staying in and watching movies with him.
Just the highest life.
That is the good life to me.
Well, to me, that is the good life, but it's not like, oh, let's party, let's get crazy and fucking go to IKEA and watch some movies, bro. Like, that's Thursday night.
Right. But they listed these types of things as reasons why she wanted to kill Caylee. And those things simultaneously contradict the party girl theory. And also, by all accounts, she was more than happy to bring Caylee around. Obviously, there was tons of different people who were like, that bitch left her kid out in the living room while she gave Tony a blowjob the other night. And, it's like, okay, I don't think she was really that worried. Everybody thought Caylee was very smart and they liked to be around her. And it didn't seem like Casey was against bringing her with her. Plus, she had built-in babysitters with her lunatic parents.
Yeah, exactly. And even one of Tony's roommates, had said how smart that Caylee was and that she knew how to count to 10 in Spanish and English. She knew her color, she knew her shape, she knew everything.
Yeah, and I mean, she was only 3. She just turned 3, so...
Right.
She obviously didn't have this terrible upbringing that we were made out to think that she had. I mean, I was like, neglected. She was just murdered straight in cold blood by her mom. I'm just like, I don't know about that. The prosecution was just really reaching with trying to create this image of Casey as a hard partying bitch of a mom. It wasn't the case. And it was very clear to everybody in the jury that what they were trying to do wasn't working. So now we're going to move on from that whole charade.
So in May of 2011 is when the tow truck company manager and George Anthony testify that from their experience, the smell of Casey's car resembled human decomposition. And then during the cross-examination, George Anthony tells Jose Baez that he did not sexually abuse Casey, which was like the shocker of the trial for Jose Baez. He said something along the lines of Caylee could have her father's penis in her mouth in the morning and go to school that day and act like nothing happened.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's kind of why, like, last episode
You're saying he was a sleaze?
I was saying he was a sleazeball because there are people who are sexually abused in their childhood, and to make that a thing in a trial, to give like a shocking statement, to tear down somebody's character. George Anthony didn't need that help to tear down his character. He was a lying
That's true.
fucking person.
But let's just make it clear that we really don't know for sure that he didn't do it.
That is true.
Who knows? So we really don't know. He's a slime ball. He has some sort of sexual addiction of some sort, because in his browser history, he had been many times soliciting sex from overage, like not underage, but people his own age, escorts, and trying to hook up with people. He had in his late teens or early 20s had stolen somebody's underwear one time. Like, it does seem like he might have a pattern of maybe some hypersexual behavior or something, but there was never any indication that he was trying to solicit anything from underage individuals. Right. So there's nothing to really support that, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's not true, because he's a sleaze, she's fucked up, they're all fucked up. Who fucking knows what they're capable of doing?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and also regarding that tow truck manager and George Anthony testifying about the car smell, we talked about that last episode, and so that was questionable, considering that they were both like meh about it at the time, and then now that the trial is here, they're going, it's a body,
It was a decomposition in the car.
Right, for sure, but we let it go at the time.
Yeah. So in May as well, Cindy Anthony testifies that they swam that day, and Caylee could get up the ladder into the pool. And she further testifies that she also believed that Casey had worked at Universal Studios and had a babysitter named Zanny. Cindy says her description of Casey's car smelling, quote, like someone died, was just a, quote, figure of speech. And she tried to get rid of the smell by spraying Febreze household eliminator in the trunk, which, I mean... Look, if you're trying to cover up an odor, I'm going to tell you right now, do not place an odor on top of another odor. That's just me. I'm just letting you know household cleaning tips.
but keep that Febreze in mind when we move on and talk about the trunk in a little bit. Also, keep in mind that Caylee could get up the ladder on her own and get into a pool on her own. And she was kind of obsessed about it. They testified that as well, that she loved the pool, and she was constantly trying to get into the pool. And she could also open the door. And I think we'll talk about it later, but she could also open the back door to get to the pool. So,
yeah,
there's always that.
She says she found the pool ladder in the pool the evening of June 16th. Casey's friend Amy talks about Casey's frustration about getting help with Caylee.
Which I said was kind of, I think, a put on. But like I went into that already.
And then reveals that on June 27th, Casey had texted her about a dead animal on the frame of the car, which kind of harkens back to the same type of behavior Cindy exhibited when she was telling colleagues at work about the fact that the ladder had been taken from their above-ground swimming pool. And just kind of seems like she was covering her tracks up a bit.
Somebody put the ladder up to the pool last night. I don't know who it was. It's like, lady. And so, yeah, there's a dead body of an animal in the frame of your car. Could you just be driving around with that?
Oh!
I don't know.
No. Are you kidding me? No. Gross. What?
This one time, this bird When I was driving to work one day, this bird flew in front of my car, and I was like, bitch, you almost got hit. And then I got home from work, and then my dad came home from work, and he was like, this was when I was a teenager, and he was like, Ashley, you hit a bird today. It's stuck in the grill of your car. I didn't even notice that. So that's what I was like, well, maybe that's what she means.
Well, let me tell you something. I was going on a test drive once when I was selling cars, and my customer hit a fucking bird, and it was stuck in the grill of the goddamn car. Which,
so maybe that's what she meant.
Which, okay, but I mean,
maybe it happened. But why are you giving information no one asked for?
I didn't ask. I didn't. You didn't tell me. You never told me that story about the bird. I never told you the story about the bird until right now. You know, like I didn't text. I didn't text somebody while I was on my test drive and say, "Oh my God, we hit a bird." You know, like it's just weird.
Guess what, Amy? There's a dead animal in the frame of my car.
It's just strange.
Her and Cindy both have that. I can just hear it, their voice. Because I have Cindy going, there's a damn dead body in here.
Oh, you have the 911 call rolling in your head.
That's all I can think about. Okay, so let's get into some of the major evidence that was presented in the trial, starting with that elusive smell in the trunk. Like we've discussed, there were some days it was there were others it wasn't. But overall, there were quite a few experts that testified that it did smell like there was a decomposing body in the trunk of the car at some point.
So the first officers to arrive at the Anthony home on July 16th, 2008, testify that they did not smell human decomposition in Casey's car, and also admit that they did not search the other two family cars. Side note, this is also when they testify about Casey going to Universal Orlando Resort with Casey that day, where she confessed that she no longer worked there and did not have a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. But back to the trunk. A dog handler describes dog alerting to human...
Demon decomposition. That's badass, man.
A dog handler describes dog alerting to human decomposition in the trunk as well as Caylee's playhouse. Then a second dog handler says his dog smelled decomposition in the backyard.
The dog handler stuff was highly contested because they hit on him on certain areas. Some days they didn't hit him on it. Other days it was very...
hit or miss.
Yes, it's very hit or miss. But, that kind of evidence, cadaver dogs hitting on things, that's not entirely great to be used as evidence in court. Maybe it could be good as a very small contributor, but it's kind of like fingerprint analysis, or what are some of the other ones that have since been completely pretty much DNA touch DNA evidence. It's been, they say now we should never have given these things as much credence in court as we had been. It's not foolproof or even incredibly scientific at this point. It's just kind of like flying in the wind. So anyway, yeah. But I mean, like I said, it's interesting, but there's so many different factors that affect the dog hitting on certain things or not hitting on certain things that it's hard to use that as, here we are, they did it, so it's definitely what happened. According to the timeline that we have discussed already, it is pretty well established and agreed to on all sides that Caylee died on June 16th, sometime in that day. Casey's car was towed on the 24th of June, and the prosecution contends that Casey drove around with Caylee's body in the trunk until at least the 18th, while the defense stated that the body was never in the car at all. While we can't really say anything for sure, what we can prove is that the body wasn't in the car after June 26th, which was 11 days after her death, because the car was then no longer in Casey's possession. It was at the tow lot, and the body was not in the car whenever they opened it up. from June 16th to the 23rd, at which point the prosecution claims that there was a dead body in her car for at least part of this time period. Caylee was driving her car all over the place. She was driving people in it. She was parking close to other cars, to the front door of her boyfriend's apartment, and the car was sitting out in Florida summer heat, and no one whatsoever testified that they smelled anything off in her car during this time. So, that's pretty... I would say if Caylee's body was in her car at that time, the people that were driving in her car with her to go to the store in the movies would have
noticed it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Boo hiss to that theory. On the 23rd of June, when Caylee ran out of gas, that is when she and Tony drove to the Anthony house and broke into the shed to steal those goddamn gas cans that we'll talk about in a little while. It was Tony that testified that after filling the tank with the cans, Caylee popped the trunk to put the cans inside of it, and he was standing right there. He smelled nothing but gasoline. And if Caylee's body was in there, I don't think she would have been like, hey, bitch, come stand next to me while I open this trunk up and you can see my kid right here. It just doesn't seem likely. So the following day is when George and Caylee had their gas can run-in. However, it actually went down. As you recall, George said he saw inside the trunk initially, and at the trial, he was trying to say that she was hiding the trunk from him. But in both versions, he said that he did not smell anything foul coming from the trunk that day. So it would appear that George was altering his testimony to assist the prosecution in their case, which I believe begins to elucidate why the jury found him unreliable and extremely suspicious, because anybody with 2 eyes and a brain, you don't even have to have 2 eyes, 2 ears, anyone with the ability to hear
Yes.
would know that George is a lying ass hoe.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the 25th of June is the date that Caylee told her friend Amy that her car smelled in a phone conversation. Then 2 days later, she sent Amy that text, something is in the grill of my car.
Oh, Jesus.
And after sending that text, she sent another saying that her car had run out of gas and it was pushed into the parking lot of that Amscot where she left it and where it was eventually towed from. So she probably didn't have, I don't know, she left it there, so I don't think she was, there was any
worried about a body in it.
Right. Then the 30th, the car was towed and it remained there for 2 weeks. It was during this time that guy, the Simon Birch guy from the tow lot, said he approached the car and it smelled bad, but the law doesn't allow them to open the car up without the owner present, so he just brushed it off. But like we've said,
why wouldn't you, if you feel like that's the case, if you feel like this car smells like there's human decomposition in it,
right?
You wouldn't call the authorities? Like, you wouldn't call somebody to say, hey, I towed this car. I need you to come here because it smells like something's up with it.
Right.
And couldn't they do further, even if it is illegal to open up the car without the owner's permission? Wouldn't they do anything further in order to get a hold of the owner of the car to open it? Like, wouldn't
I would
the
think
police,
so.
you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. And I would think that you're right. But, I think that for some reason, this guy is so set on telling this tale.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Because it doesn't make sense. Because of George and his complete inaction. And then we already talked about how Cindy just kind of sprayed the trunk with Febreze and went about her day. So it wasn't like she was thinking in her head, my granddaughter has been dead in this trunk, and I'm just going to Febreze it on out.
Yeah.
No. Unless she's that fucking nuts, which is possible. Totally possible, actually. So it's definitely possible that she willed herself into forgetting or something, Mm-hmm. She's got some major skills in that department. But it really didn't seem like she thought that there was a dead body in the trunk. So after Cindy got off work that day that they collected the car from the tow lot, she tracked down Caylee's friend, Amy, who said that Cindy did make mention of the smell in the car, but she acted like she was more worried about tracking Caylee down for custody reasons in regard to Caylee. Not that she was going, I think there's been a death. Amy led Cindy to Tony Lazzaro's apartment, and once she was there, she didn't even ask if they'd seen Caylee or where Caylee was. So again, I don't think at the moment she was entirely focused on thinking that,
where's Caylee?
Yeah, that something was wrong with Caylee. Unless her not asking anything at all is just a sign that she already knew that she was dead, which is possible too.
Right.
With this family. She made those 911 calls as an attempt to force the custody issue, as she kind of stated over and over. And then later, after it was discovered that Caylee was missing and the police were dispatched to the house, multiple officers walked through the garage, like you said earlier, and reported that there was no smell whatsoever. Now, the following day, another officer, Detective Yuri, we talked about last episode, Yuri, he arrived at the home, and George then pulled him aside to say, "The car smells." But Yuri then did nothing to inspect or secure the car or the crime scene in regard to the smell of the car. And like you said, they weren't even like, hey, maybe we should look at these other cars, or maybe let's do some stuff here. They were just like, meh. There's just not really a lot of concern about it, because so it obviously wasn't that bad. There was a handful of forensic experts that did testify to smelling human decomp in the trunk, including the dog handler, a medical examiner, and a crime scene investigator. The prosecution was trying to make the case that Casey drove around with Caylee's body in the trunk for a few days, at which time body fluid seeped out into the trunk, permeating the liner in the trunk and making it smell long after the body was removed. And if we're to believe this theory that they presented, the body was in the car on the 16th, but somehow no one really noticed the odor until sometime around the 25th, which was days after the body had been removed from it, which is interesting. A more likely scenario is that the garbage bag was placed in the car around the 23rd, and after a few days of it being left in the Florida heat and sun, the car started to smell like unholy shit.
Right, which is what I'm leaning more towards, because you leave anything in a car in absolute heat and humidity, it's not going to smell great.
No. Even some onions that were like in a burrito I left in the car smelled bad the other day.
Listen up. I'm in Minnesota. It's 20 degrees here.
Everything is like a refrigerator.
Everything is like a refrigerator. And they had bagels that I took to bring home. And I left them in my car and didn't smell great. Car smelled like onions.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't cute because I got an everything bagel.
Okay.
And it didn't smell nice.
Oh, even in a frigid atmosphere, the car smells bad. So yeah, think about, and we'll talk about what's in this trash in a minute. George at the trial stuck to his guns that he never once thought the smell coming from the trunk was anything other than human decomposition, which really puts into question his inaction following getting the car from the tow yard and telling Cindy it was rotting pizza smelling up the car, which wasn't even in there. So this means that either George was lying in trial to bolster the prosecution's case, or that he really did think the smell was human decomposition, but he took no action after retrieving the car because he already knew that Caylee was dead. He became very combative and defensive when he was being cross-examined by Jose Baez. At one point, Baez was questioning him about the quote-unquote unmistakable smell you never forget, which is what George described it as, of human decomposition in the trunk, and was asking him if the smell became stronger once the trunk was opened. But George could not, for the life of him, answer yes or no. He just kept saying that he already smelled the smell, and upon opening the trunk, he found a garbage bag inside. And so Baez would try to reword it and say, listen, did it get worse when you opened the trunk up? And he would, or when she opened the trunk up, and he did, or whoever opened it, and he would just be like, I already smelled it, dude. Like he just wouldn't say.
Oh my God. Just answer answer yes or no.
It's like, what does it hurt? I don't understand what he's trying for here. And then he would accuse Baez of badgering him when he would continue to try and get a direct answer from him, which is the whole point of what you're doing there. It's crazy. But it was pointed out that if it was the prosecution or police that were questioning him about the smell, that George would identify it as human decomposition. But if he was around Cindy in the media getting interviewed, he would maintain that Casey was innocent, and he would say it was trash. How
Which
can
one?
you be that flim-flammy Magoo? Like, I don't get it.
Pick a lane. Pick one lane. Just go and travel down in that lane for fuck's sake.
What does it mean whenever you're willing to lie to the point where you will do two different lies in front of the same person? You know what I'm saying? Like you
Yeah. Which one is the lie? Which one is the truth? Which one do you really think?
you don't even care.
Why do you have zero spine? You have no spine.
Well, and
no spine.
You don't even care if you are caught in your lie. Do you believe both versions? I don't understand this. In his deposition in 2009, George had said that it could have very well have been trash sitting in the hot car for 14 days, just as much as it could have been human decomposition. But in the I know. But in the trial, he was 100% sure, I'll stake my life on it, it was a dead body. When Baez pointed out the differences in his testimony that day versus his deposition, George got indignant, lecturing him on civility, and ended with a dramatic, "How dare you try to tell me that I did something differently than what I did?" I'm pretty sure that this nut job believes his lies, because otherwise, you're sitting there listening to, I'm sure he either played it for him or he read it out to him, what he said in his deposition, and then he just said this other thing, and he's getting pissed. I don't understand.
Sir, that is literally what you just said. Sir, I'm not telling you did something differently than what you did. You're telling me that you did something differently than what you did.
How dare you? Oh my God. So Detective Yuri Melich outlined what was found in the garbage bag in the trunk, saying that although there were food items inside, as well as small flies, maggots, the smell from the trash was distinctly different from the smell coming from within the car. I read that to you because the prosecution attempted to say that there were no food items in the trash bag in the trunk, but clearly there were, and the CSI report states that there was also. So, okay.
I had also read that are you talking about, okay, so those maggots and flies, I had also read that were there to be human decomposition in the trunk, there would also be a plethora. And when I say a plethora, I mean an absolute plethora of botflies.
Yeah.
There would be an abundance of them in the car as well, and there were not.
No. And we'll talk about some of the bugs that were in there in a second. Here's what I think is the biggest WTF bit of information, because what was also present in the trash bag was a lot of brown liquid, and the stuff inside the trash bag was saturated with this liquid, and pieces of soaked stuff were clinging to the sides of the bag, all wet and sloppy. When everything was separated out and laid onto brown paper, the liquid was documented just running off of the paper.
Gross.
Now, what was this liquid, you ask?
What was this liquid?
Well, once everything was removed and laid out, there was an empty container of Skull chewing tobacco, and multiple of the bottles had that dark liquid in it.
Like a spittoons? Like, were they like, bleh? Bleh.
Yep. So Dr. Huntington, which was a witness for the defense, said that he noticed multiple bottles with the dark residue in them that he recognized as, like you just said, spittoons, which I thought was only in Deadwood that people use such terms, but I guess not.
It's gross to me that there were what's a Crystal Light bottle? Is that like a beer bottle?
No, Crystal Light is that sugar-free drink mix that you put into your...
Oh, Crystal Light. Why would you use that? People usually use like water bottles.
Well, I don't know. Maybe that's
gross.
Maybe there's pre-mixed Crystal Light juice. I don't know. Either way, gross. So what the defense was arguing at the trial was that human tobacco spit mixed with rotting food festering in the trash bags for weeks in the Florida summer sun were what had the car smelling like death versus an actual decomposing human body, per the evidence that was actually in the fucking car versus an imaginary body that you don't really know was in the car ever and you're trying to say was.
So you're saying that tobacco spit doesn't smell great?
Holy shit, that's a great point, everyone. Has anyone ever known someone that chews chewing tobacco, spit it in a bottle in the car, and left it in Texas summer heat?
Oh.
It is the worst smell.
It's not cute.
It's awful. I mean, have you ever been licked on the face by somebody that has bad breath?
Yes.
Yeah, that itself is a traumatizing thing. Think about all that spit collecting and then sitting in a car.
I don't want to think about that, no.
That's nasty. Unfortunately, the prosecution never collected any of the saliva that was present at the scene. They never even told their Dr. Voss that there was any saliva present at the scene, and they never gave him any samples to do comparative tests.
Not that Dr. Voss would have even been forthcoming with that kind of information, but we'll talk about him in a sec.
That gem of a doctor. In the book, Everything You Didn't Know About the Casey Anthony Trial by S.K. Patton, they describe the 4 compounds that comprise the majority of the smell that comes from human decomposition, which are cadaverine, putrescine, scatol, and indole. And guess what? Putrescine and cadaverine both contribute to the processes of bad breath and or saliva smells.
Gross.
2 huge compounds in human decomp are the exact same thing that we have for bad breath and sick-ass spit shit. And so that's a pretty huge, glaring detail that if you're sitting here arguing about this smell in the trunk tirelessly, you would think would be a pretty huge aspect of it, you know?
Absolutely.
So, everybody, that's pretty big. I was like, hey, now there's an actual explanation for that whole shit show. Move along.
So at the beginning of June of 2011, videotapes are shown of Casey lying to her parents in jail and denying to an officer on July 16, 2008, that Caylee had drowned in the pool, as he had suggested. And investigators describe evidence collection from Casey's car and garbage bag that had been in it. One investigator states that he smells human decomposition. Anyways, then an FBI forensic scientist testifies a single hair removed from the car trunk was similar to a hair from Caylee's hairbrush and had what is called root banding. Now, root banding is the presence of a darkened band at the root portion of the hair, consistent with that of a decomposing body. When I read this initially, my first reaction is that something that happens when hair just falls out? Because I don't know if we all know this, but I know that hair is dead hair cells. Yeah. Your hair grows.
Hair is actually dead.
It's all dead.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, definitely that seems like that is evidence that can be disputed.
Right. The hair was a mitochondrial DNA match to Caylee because it had to be someone on Cindy's side of the family. And because the hair was untreated and due to the length of it, they determined it to be Caylee's, but it really could never be 100% that's Caylee's hair. Mm-hmm. Also in the trunk were hairs of Casey, other family members, and their pets. So it's pretty clear that the whole gang wasn't being escorted around in the back of
the trunk.
And
escorted.
Right. So the reason any aspect of the hair is found in the trunk is significant at all is because of that post-mortem banding that you just talked about. You would assume, though, that if a body was left decomposing in a trunk, that it would probably leave behind more than one single hair.
Well, isn't that how we all die? We die and then we become one strand of hair. That's what I thought.
What a life.
What a life and death.
It has also been proven that certain environmental conditions can cause living people's hair to begin to discolor in a similar fashion, but also let's consider that the hair was exposed to rotting human spit, and could that perhaps be a similar enough compound to create the same effect of that root banding? It's possible. We don't really know, and they didn't test it, so We can't.
We don't know. Yeah, we can't truly say.
No. Moving on from that, that's just so that was another little because I remember hearing that and thinking, well, there's a case closed, motherfuckers, but it's not. Then there was the stain in the trunk that the prosecution claimed was the, quote, size of a human body.
How big is that? How big or small really is that? Because a human body does vary from infant size and then
huge giant man
size.
Yes.
Huge giant mountain man size. I mean, we know you're a teeny tiny little bean of a person, right? And then when you compare yourself to one of our friends that we know and love, like Adam from the Bumblebutt podcast, who is
a giant
6'12",
6'12",
which would be 7 feet, but you know, there's a huge difference there.
Right. Nicole and I went and got coffee yesterday morning, and this man was walking his little child to school, and I was like, kids are so small. Nicole, look how small that kid is. Like, what? And that kid was walking to school, so Caylee was probably smaller than that kid, and I'm telling you, I was like, that little thing could be blown away with a strong gust of wind.
So what is the size of a human body? Is my question. You know what I mean?
So, okay, right. That's a vague description. So Dr. Arpad Voss, he analyzed a sample of the trunk lining and determined that there was butyric acid present, which is one of the fatty acids that's found in human decomposition. He said that it is the first compound that is liberated during decomposition, thus determined the stain to be that of human decomp, and that was that.
Okay.
Prosecution's case was closed.
All right. Well, good. Okay. Jesus Christ.
Very thorough. In actuality, as the defense argued, butyric acid is found in all kinds of organic material, from animal fats to plant oils, milk, cheese, parmesan, and as a product of anaerobic fermentation, as far as body odors, vomit, and yes, saliva are concerned. The defense also had entomologist and decomposition expert Dr. Timothy Huntington do a demonstration with a decomposing pig in a trunk to replicate the conditions that the state was claiming had happened to Caylee. In his demonstration, he noted that the stain left by the pig was extremely dark and very noticeable versus the stain that you could barely identify in the trunk in all the photos. And I agree, because I looked at them for a while, trying so hard. I was like, what is it called when you make it better?
Enhance.
Enhance, yes, there you go. They were like enhanced, and I was still going, where is this? Just unmistakable body stain. I follow crime scene cleaners on Instagram, bitch, and I know what it looks like when there's a body decomposing. It's not pretty. I wouldn't go, where was that again? Just based off of Cindy Anthony supposedly just giving it a quick wipe down. But he testified that he didn't see how the stain in the trunk could possibly be human decomp, as it looked vastly different from any human or animal decomp that he'd seen, and he is a fucking expert here. In addition to Timothy Huntington, FBI DNA analyst Heather Schubert testified that it is possible to extract DNA from decomposition fluids, but that she was unable to extract any DNA from the trunk samples.
Which is something I appreciate that she said that she wasn't able to do, because she's not doing what this other Voss character does, where he takes evidence and he tries to make his experiments match the evidence.
Right.
And she's just taking the evidence and saying, this doesn't match what is the case.
Right. What Voss seems to want to do is make the evidence tell a story that he wanted it to tell.
Yes.
We'll kind of talk about it a little more, but he seemed like he was really working for the prosecution in a way that was unethical completely.
I don't like that at all.
No. This Heather Schubert, she said that it was possible for DNA to degrade over time with heat added to the equation, but that she couldn't say that it was the case in Casey's trunk. And, when it says heat over time to degrade the DNA, I would think it would take longer than a week.
A little bit.
I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
A little bit longer. So this Dr. Arpad Voss of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory describes using a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer to find human signs. I don't know what it is.
I think this is a made-up machine. I think he did create it, did he not? Or am I lying? I'm not kidding. This sounds like it's from Ghostbusters.
Are you Zach Baggins? Oh my God, I swear to God, you're so funny. I was thinking something kind of in line. To find signs of human decomposition and a high level of chloroform in the trunk of Casey's car. And the defense obviously challenges Voss's financial motivation and the chain of evidence.
So what you're saying is he was being bribed for these determinations?
What? Could that possibly be the case? That would be crazy.
That's weird. But the overwhelming opinion of the scientific community on this matter is that the science on air sampling and decomposition is just too new and shouldn't be presented in court as evidence, much like all of Voss's other evidence that he presented in court.
So a scientist who worked with Voss also testifies that tests did not conclusively prove that there was a body in the trunk.
Duh.
Crazy. FBI's forensic chemist examiner could not find traces of chloroform in the car, and FBI forensics expert found no hair in the trunk liner showing signs of decomposition.
Oh, that's an odd bit of information there, though.
So strange. An FBI hair and fiber expert says that there is only one hair from the car trunk that had sign of decomposition. And there's a long, like I said before, where I question, well, how does this happen when your hair just falls out? There is a long-standing debate among prosecutors and defense over the reliability of root banding. An expert in forensic toxicology testifies that Dr. Voss's test, quote, lacked organization and planning and had, quote, minimal standards of quality control.
Oh.
He also mentions that chloroform is a byproduct of chlorinated swimming pool water, which we know Caylee loves to do.
Yes, and could climb up the ladder and open the door by herself.
Also, one more thing. Let me tell you something. Hair gets everywhere. As a woman,
my
hair is literally everywhere.
It's so funny that you mentioned that because today I came home for a little break between shifts and I was like, I'm going to vacuum this house up. And then I start realizing that my hair is everywhere in this house. It's all over the place because my hair falls out everywhere.
Everywhere.
It's everywhere.
No matter if I brush it, if I don't brush it, wash my hair.
If I don't brush it, it falls out in clumps. If I brush it, it falls out little by little.
It's always falling out. So I don't know. The one strand of hair is shocking for the mere fact that there was only one strand of hair and there wasn't more.
Right. I wish somebody would have had the wherewithal to test a piece of hair with chewing tobacco spit and see if it created that kind of situation on the root or not. I'm curious. But regardless, there has not been any peer review on the subject as far as Dr. Voss's tests were concerned, and they did not allow anyone to even see his work or his database to cross-examine him or evaluate his work. So that's kind of a damning,
troubling
situation here.
Absolutely. The defense then presented FBI forensic chemist Kenneth Furton, who studies human decomposition, and he testified that the chemicals Voss identified in the trunk were not unique to human decomposition and could actually be found in various items in any kitchen trash.
You mean what was exactly in the trunk?
Something like that.
The exact thing that was in the trunk? When Voss was asked on the stand if the chemicals he found could be garbage, his response was, I don't know. I've never studied garbage.
Fuck.
But if you are testifying in a murder trial regarding the chemicals you're finding in a trunk with garbage, and you're trying to say that it was a body that wasn't present in the trunk and not the garbage that was actually in the trunk, then you should probably have done some research on garbage to make damn sure that what you're claiming is true and you're not just making some sweeping
allegation.
How can you even say, I don't know? You should fucking know. You should be comparing. That's the whole fucking point of this.
That's the point of a trial. Strange enough, that's the point of a trial.
And that's a point of you doing research on the evidence that is here for us to look at, because there's not a shit ton. So you should really be going hard on what you do have. And I know there are people out there like, these girls are stupid ass little bitches that think they know more than a doctor. But guess what? Sometimes doctors are lazy and they don't even care.
Listen up. I don't think I know more than a doctor. However, I'm the type of person that I need to see everything. I need to see all sides of a story in order to make a decision. And that's what we're doing here, is we're trying to take a look at all sides of this story to make a decision. And by the way, we had already made a decision. We had already made a decision that Casey Anthony was a fucking killing monster, top mom bitch. Yeah. But now, seeing additional evidence or lack thereof, we're making different thought processes jive.
Also, as a doctor and a scientist, you should be taking all the elements into consideration when you're making your determination about what this is. So that's what you should be doing as a scientist. So what he claimed was that he was only shown a photo of dry trash, so he felt comfortable ruling that out. But we see in the photos of the contents of the trunk, if you want to look it up for yourself, we'll post it, that there is a brown liquid leaking all over the damn place. And so if he was just shown a select photo of the trash once it had dried so that he had less reason to question what was going on there, that's not right either, if that's even true. This seems to be just another example of the prosecution cherry-picking information to provide to their witnesses to frame the story how they want. And sure, the defense is going to do some of that too, but when it comes down to facts, the facts tell all we really need to know. Okay. I'm freaking out right now.
So, in testimony, the lead detective admits a professor of chemistry called by the defense says there is no scientifically valid instrument that can identify decomposition, that there is no consensus on what chemicals are typical of human decomposition, and that chemical compounds identified by Dr. Voss in air samples can be found in household products and, one more time, garbage.
Right, so everybody's in agreement about this.
About the
that Dr.
thing.
Voss is basically what they're doing is without actually saying, you're a fraud, they're just telling everyone.
This seems fraudulent.
Yes. So another aspect of the trunk were the maggots that were found inside of it, as we slightly mentioned earlier.
A forensic entomologist called by the defense states that if there was a body in the trunk, there should have been hundreds or even thousands of blowflies trapped in the trunk as well.
They should have opened that trunk up and blowflies should have come blowing at their faces.
Yes.
And that didn't happen. In the trash bag that was found in Casey's trunk, there were a number of crumpled up paper towels that had cocoons in the folds, most of them being the species Megacilia scalaris. And Megascalaris are not early colonizing insects, meaning that they aren't attracted in the early stages of decomposition. And both the prosecution and the defense agreed that there were only these types of insects in the trunk. So not the types that would be attracted in early stages of decomposition, which is all that Caylee would have been able to be in at all. The state sent Dr. Voss one of the paper towels for him to determine what substance on the towels attracted the insects. He determined it to be something called human adipocere, which is a grayish, waxy, organic substance that is formed by the anaerobic bacterial hydrolysis of fat in tissue, such as body fat in a dead body. The process is most successful under certain conditions, particularly an environment with high levels of moisture and an absence of oxygen, such as the bottom of a lake or a sealed casket. And I don't know if a trunk is sealed from oxygen enough for this to be ideal conditions, or if it's moist enough in there for that to take place.
I mean, Florida's humid, but is it that humid?
I don't know. I read some stories about it where people were floating in a pond for a long ass time, and that really helped it along, and things of that nature.
It's not that. Then Florida's not that humid.
No, not that humid. The process typically begins after about 3 or 4 weeks of death, which didn't really give Caylee time for that to happen either. Mm-hmm. And under the right conditions, it can continue for centuries. And I want to point out that it is unlikely for a body in a warm environment to form adipocere deposits. Additionally, the more body fat someone has, the more likely they will undergo that adipocere transformation. And
the amount of body fat Caylee had on her body wasn't that much
at all.
Being a 3-year-old child. Are you sure, Ashley?
She was a tiny little thing. So the prosecution wasn't claiming that Caylee's body was covered in maggots in the trunk. They were claiming that the insects were unable to get to her body while it was in the trunk due to it being so well sealed off. Then it was removed. And when it was removed, someone wiped off the adipocere with paper towels, threw them in the trash bag, and then put that trash bag in the trunk. And then the trunk wasn't sealed off anymore enough, so the maggots were able to get inside and be attracted to those paper towels.
Okay.
In addition, somehow in the process of wiping up that grayish, waxy substance, they managed to get that and only that, and not any of the dark decomposition fluids that are present in that situation, which I find that to be a feat of impossibility.
That was just an excellent cleanup job, Ashton.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Regardless, there was no way for anyone to prove that this adipocere came from a human body or if it was from an animal or what. When asked how it was determined that the substance was from a human and not an animal, Dr. Voss said it was because of the stain in the trunk, the smell of the trunk, and that he didn't see any meat in the trash bag. Fuck me, dude. You don't need to see meat to have wiped up grease.
Okay.
The defense asked him how he could explain the marijuana that was also found on the paper towel, and he couldn't.
Oh, don't know about that. I don't know what that is. I've never smelled it before in my life.
They posited that it was more likely that the paper towel was used to wipe up a counter or a stovetop at Casey's boyfriend's house, where they also broke up and smoked weed, which in reality does sound way more logical than the strategic wiping up of certain body fluids and not others. And I personally have wiped up a greasy counter that may have had flakes of marijuana on it before. And I'm just saying, this adipocere, for anyone that's like, I keep saying this stupid word, but think about if you cook sausage or ground beef or bacon or chicken thighs and all that fat that's left over and it becomes kind of hardish. That's what, they probably wiped up something along those lines. It's on this paper towel and yada yada.
Listen up. I save that.
Well,
I save that and recook with it.
Well, right, but if they might have wiped up either a pan or maybe even maybe it was just a countertop, because I didn't really see it. It didn't necessarily say it was this huge amount, like thick ass stuff. It was just a little bit. So you know how sometimes, when you cook stuff like bacon, the grease just flies off. So they probably wiped up a counter. There's weed on there, and then this doctor is like, it's a dead body for sure because there's a dead child in this situation. So this has got to be her. Ugh. In his closing statement, Baez summed the whole thing up pretty well, saying no matter what, that smell being in the car did not show how Caylee died, only that she may or may not have been transported in it after death. He emphasized that while the car was primarily Casey's, other people, including George, had access to it all the time. And also think about the fact that at one point, Cindy called the cops saying Caylee had stolen that car. So it didn't seem like it was actually Caylee's car for her to keep at all times, 100%. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, no matter what, it doesn't prove how Caylee died, which is the key issue that the prosecution was supposed to be trying to make a case for here. So the next issue is the gas cans, which we spoke about last episode. And how George had two different stories, one immediately following the incident where he says Casey stole them and then brought them back, and then the one that he gave in court, which was this whole dramatic story about her trying to keep him from looking in her trunk, and she sped off in a tizzy after he tried to get near it. And the cans became a pretty important part of the evidence in the trial that would ultimately affect the jury's decision. Because when Caylee's body was found, there were multiple pieces of this very specific tape. And it was the same tape that was found on the gas can that didn't have a cap on it that the police confiscated from the Anthony home. So while everybody knows that Casey or someone in the Anthony household had to have disposed of Caylee's body and thus finding the same duct tape that had been with the body at the Anthony home isn't such a huge shock to anyone, what was pretty disturbing regarding the testimony on the gas cans was the way that George behaved about that, which isn't really a surprise to anyone, I'm sure, because he behaved like a fucking asshole the whole time.
The whole trial.
So when the police picked up the gas cans on August 1st, a cap was missing from one. Like we talked about, there was duct tape covering the hole. When the prosecution asked George, when they showed him the picture of the gas can, he didn't ask him anything but if George recognized the can, and George immediately blurted out, "I didn't put that duct tape on there." And that wasn't even the question. Okay, dude. Then, in the same line of questioning, the same prosecutor said something else, and George said he actually did put the tape on the gas can, but he didn't put that particular tape on the can, and he was trying to claim that the police changed the tape or something after they confiscated it from him. He just had all these convoluted stories. And then Jeff Ashton, the prosecutor, asked him when the last time he mowed the lawn was, because he knew he mowed it every week, and he thought maybe that would make George admit he did put the duct tape on the can because he would be the only one dealing with it. And he began to make up a story about 2 other gas cans that he had to buy to replace the ones that Casey took. But the ones Casey took were returned to him 4 hours after she took them. So he didn't go buy other ones. He's insane.
He didn't have to.
He's insane. He just can't give a straight answer to save his life. And eventually, after, being questioned like a madman about this gas can by the prosecution and the defense, Jose Baez finally got George to concede that he probably did put the duct tape on the gas can.
Oh, good.
Oh, my God. He is such an idiot. So it seemed pretty clear to everyone in the jury that while George couldn't get his story straight about the whole situation, he remained pretty steadfast, or at least he attempted to, about one thing, no matter who was questioning him, and it was that he did not put that duct tape on the can, even though all evidence points to a different conclusion. So why in the fuck would George be so reticent to admit that he had anything to do with that duct tape? What is the reason? His behavior in this specific incident was even later mentioned by a juror, Jennifer Ford, who said, "It was all, 'What do you mean? And can you ask the question again?' And clearly you can follow a logical conversation and respond. He acted like he just couldn't understand what was going on. And it was clear to me that he was just being difficult and he didn't want to answer questions. And if it wouldn't help the prosecution's case, he wasn't going to just, I don't recall." That leads us to our next subject, which is Caylee's remains, because they were found 19 feet away from the road on Suburban Drive, right by their goddamn house. Some of her bones had scattered, but her skull, mandible, remnants of clothing, and a pull-up diaper, and most of her bones were found inside a bag. She was initially wrapped in a Winnie the Pooh blanket from her crib, then wrapped in a laundry bag, and then wrapped in 2 black trash bags with yellow drawstring handles. Her body had completely skeletonized, so there was no soft tissue to examine, but it was agreed by all the medical examiners involved that there was no trauma to the bones, and the toxicology screen was negative. Thus, medically speaking, there was no way to determine the cause of death. The state's first medical examiner, Dr. Utz, said it was not possible to determine a cause of death, period. He wouldn't go along with the prosecution's claim that the duct tape was the murder weapon.
Good.
Yeah, right. And they quickly replaced him in what some may call cherry picking with a Dr. Jan Garavaglia. Why can't I say this lady's name? Who has a show, Dr. G, Medical Examiner, and has been on shows like Dr. Oz and Oprah.
Oh, well, she should be the most credible person since she's on Oprah.
Dr. Oz is worse than Oprah.
Oh, Dr. Oz. Well, Dr. Oz is a product of Oprah.
Oh, true.
So the medical examiner, Dr. Jan Garavaglia, states that the death is ruled a homicide because of the delay in reporting the disappearance, the fact that the body was hidden, and the existence of duct tape, but states under cross-examination that she did not know how the child died.
So, based off of the circumstantial evidence, she determined that Caylee's death was homicide by undetermined means, which is very convenient.
Vague.
Yes. But also, the fact that the body was hidden and the family delayed in reporting the disappearance of the child is fairly common lying ass behavior that the Anthonys exhibit on a daily basis. So take that into consideration, but she isn't this lady. But this Garavaglia was willing to say what the prosecution wanted, so she was the ding-ding winner for this medical examiner position for the Anthony trial.
So then the defense calls a new witness, Dr. Werner Spitz, who questions the medical examiner's autopsy, including the failure to open the skull, says that there is no indication that the death was a homicide, and he also says that he believes the duct tape was placed on the skull after decomposition, and that the crime scene photos of the position of the hair on the skull were staged, possibly by Jen Garavaglia.
Oh. He was part of two separate commissions that investigated the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and JFK, so he had some credibility. Each doctor had separate opinions on the duct tape. Garavaglia felt that the duct tape had been applied before decomposition to keep the mandible in place, and Spitz thought it had been applied after the body was skeletonized to keep the skull and the mandible together. I almost don't know if I agree with either one of them, honestly, but I'm also not a medical examiner. Spitz also noted in his autopsy that there was brain dust, which is decomposing dehydrated brain parts on the left inside of the skull, which would indicate that the body decomposed on its side versus the position that it was found in. And the prosecution argued that it was just regular dust, but regardless, the type of dust it is, this would indicate that Caylee's body decomposed in a position that was different from the one it was found in. And the defense claimed that the body had been moved and that there was decent evidence to suggest this was the case, that being one of them. And we talked last episode about how Roy Kronk, the man that found the body, had attempted to get the police to investigate what he thought could be Caylee's remains for 4 fucking months and never got an answer. And the defense suggested that in that time, Kronk had either moved, hidden, or even removed the remains so that no one else could find them and collect the reward money, since the police were doing nothing to investigate his claims. Kronk's story evolved the longer the time went on, and while he wasn't a malicious individual like the defense attempted to make him out to be, he was definitely unreliable enough with his stories, and his statements were damning enough to the prosecution's claims that they didn't even call him to testify in the trial.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I know. I was kind of surprised by that.
I didn't know that.
Initially, when Kronk first reported seeing the bag, he told coworkers that he saw a skull several feet away outside of the bag. Then 4 months later, he quote-unquote found the bag once again, and he reported that it was closed and that he hit it with his meter stick and it made a thunk as if it hit plastic. So 4 months after the initial sighting, where the skull was seen outside the bag, it had somehow been placed back in the bag unless his initial story about the skull being several feet away was untrue to begin with. He then told 2 separate police officers that he opened the bag and the skull rolled out.
Oh my God. Which one?
Another
Which one? Go with one.
time, he said he lifted the bag and the skull fell out. And in yet another version, he said that he lifted the skull with his meter stick. And one of the prosecution's forensic experts testified that he was told that the man who discovered the remains had kicked the skull. So who the fuck really knows what happened when it was found or before that? And in that case, the state's argument that the body was strategically placed in the exact position that Caylee died is totally invalid. And the defense claimed that Kronk had hidden and or removed the body for some time.
Casey Anthony's defense team then files a motion to dismiss the murder charges against her because the state allegedly failed to preserve evidence in the case. And the motion is then denied.
Which, okay, sure. So the defense used evidence that multiple searches were conducted in the very area that Caylee's body was discovered by cadaver dog search teams and multiple search teams as a reason that the body was moved or perhaps wasn't even there at the time of the searches. In October, a report had been made that a child was screaming around that very area, and an intensive search was conducted, and there was nothing discovered of Caylee's remains at that time. There were 2 members of EquiSearch, Joe Jordan and Laura Buchanan, that testified that they had thoroughly searched the field with the cadaver dogs and Caylee's remains were not there. The prosecution then threatened the 2 with felonies for presenting false evidence. Actually, they threatened Joe Jordan with a felony and Laura Buchanan with a lesser charge, but they threatened these 2 EquiSearch people because they were saying that they were presenting false evidence in a federal case. And after these threats, both Joe and Laura suddenly, quote unquote, remembered that they had actually searched a different area. And while Laura didn't end up testifying at all, when Joe Jordan he was asked if he was facing criminal charges regarding what he was testifying about, and he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, which is just ridiculous because obviously he was being pressured to change his story by the prosecution. So who the fuck knows if these areas were as thoroughly searched as the 2 claim, but it's a shitty swampy mess of an area, and it's very possible that Caylee's body was there but went undetected due to the conditions. But it really doesn't make the prosecution look good when instead of just using the facts to call the 2 searchers' claims into question, they decided to threaten the 2 of them until they flipped and said what they wanted.
I mean, the prosecution does not do a very good job of making themselves look great.
No, they don't. They seem like they're desperately grasping for straws. Mm-hmm. So the next issue is the duct tape, which there was 4 pieces total. There was 3 pieces that were stuck together directly next to the skull. 1 separate piece was laying over 6 feet away. The 3 connected pieces were on the right side of Caylee's skull, starting at the back of the head and attached to the mat of the hair that was laying at the base of the skull. It then went around the right side of the face and just past the very center of the front of the skull, but there was no tape along the left side of the face at all.
So an FBI examiner states a hair from the child's skull is consistent but not identical to the single hair found in the trunk. And the FBI agent could not find any fingerprints on duct tape that was found near the remains, but initially did find adhesive in the shape of a heart on a corner of a piece of duct tape. Later, she could not find it again. Cool.
She never documented it or anything like that.
Perfect. Great work. This FBI quality assurance specialist says that the hair found in the trunk could have come from any member of the Anthony family, which we discussed. Mm-hmm. And a crime scene investigator states that heart-shaped stickers were found in Casey's room, but did not link them to the one alleged to be on the duct tape.
Because that's impossible, because there's no evidence of that initial heart. So all the pieces of this duct tape were from the same roll. There's this very distinct duct tape with a prominent logo printed on it. So this particular tape was only produced and sold very limited. There was only a few thousand rolls printed, and it was sold about 2 years prior to Caylee's death. And it was connected to the Anthony household via that one contentious item, the gas can that George said Casey stole and then threw at him in that dramatic situation. But George is not the most brilliant of individuals, and this tape was also used on missing posters around town, in addition to him being videoed on the news holding that very duct tape in a missing child command center. So I am the literal version of that meme with the blonde guy who just has his eyes closed, that he's shaking his head in disbelief.
Yeah.
That's me. After all the difficulty that George put up at the trial regarding the duct tape and refusing to own up to putting it on the gas can, this fucking Dumbo is using it literally all over town. He's literally using it all over town.
What a goddamn idiot.
Regardless, the prosecution attempted to argue that this tape was what murdered Caylee Anthony, saying it was placed over her mouth for suffocation. But the fact of the matter was that if it was applied in that way, in the way it was found, then it is highly unlikely that that would be able to even kill her, because it wasn't wrapped around her in that way. It was just and some on half of her face, really. It is also highly likely that the flooded area the body was found in eventually helped open the bag of Caylee's remains, and the tape settled on the skull post-mortem. The jurors who saw the photographs of the body at the time of discovery definitely found that the prosecution's witnesses who claimed the duct tape had been placed strategically for suffocation were not reliable based off of what they could see with their very own eyes. According to Lee and Cindy Anthony, which, I mean, their credibility is in question, but still, both of these family members and also other friends of the family did testify that the family had an established ritual for how they buried family pets when they died. What they would do is they would wrap the animal in a favorite blanket or towel, they would put them in a garbage bag, and then they would seal it with duct or packing tape. The defense argued that this is how Caylee's remains were left in the woods, and that over time and with flooding, the tape began to come off the bag, it opened, and the tape settled on the skeleton.
Okay.
Which, that sounds very logical, and that is exactly how the body was found, too.
Yeah.
Just saying. When they called George to the stand, though, it went about as well as it always did.
Great. Splendid. Absolutely stunning.
When they questioned him about the family's well-established burial rituals with their pets, he claimed to have no memory of this whatsoever.
Perfect. Okay.
He couldn't remember ever putting duct tape on anything from the buried pets to the gas can, and he couldn't even remember burying a single pet. He couldn't remember. The jurors...
I've never used duct tape in my life. I don't know what duct tape is.
Our whole family and all our friends know about the way we bury our pets, but I don't recall that at all. The jurors seem to find the defense's explanation for how the tape got there more plausible based off the circumstantial evidence, which is all that there is, or was. And they also, yet again, were left questioning what the fuck was wrong with George and what his involvement in the mix was due to his sketchy ass behavior. There was also a big to-do in the media at the time regarding that supposed heart shape adhesive that was left on the duct tape, and also there were heart stickers found at the home. But that whole thing was blown way out of proportion, because I had heard that a bajillion times, and this lady thought she saw the shape of a heart in adhesive when she was looking at it with like special lighting. She didn't ever document it. No one ever saw it again, and they tried to use it in trial even though it wasn't even there. I mean, give me a goddamn break. The prosecution tried to pretend like, oh gosh, we didn't realize it got brushed. It must have gotten brushed off whenever they were doing fingerprint analysis, but we just entered it into evidence for the hell of it. And it was just not at all the case. They then even tried to enter another heart sticker that they found 30 feet away from where the body was, stuck to a piece of cardboard, but it was pink and puffy and not at all like the stickers that were even found at the house. And we don't even know if there was a sticker on the duct tape at all, let alone if this matched this pretend heart-shaped sticker. So it's irrelevant, totally irrelevant. So what was the prosecution? What were they even trying to do with that non-existent evidence? The jurors never even spoke about it, so I think that they pretty much saw through this smoke and mirror show that they were trying to put on. Why would this family have even used this duct tape to hide this child's body? I find this whole thing to be so strange. Like, that could be tied to your house. You don't care? But so, I mean, I just don't get it.
So now we're going to go into the infamous chloroform section of our evidence of the trial.
Yes.
Software analyst John Bradley states that someone used the Anthony computer to search the website scipot.com for chloroform 84 times on March 21st, 2008. During cross-examination, he does actually admit that automatic page reloading could account for that number, and there was no way of knowing who performed the searches. But
okay, so I'm sure we've all heard this. Anyone that's listened to this case, 84 times she looked for chloroform, 84 times. What the prosecution did was sent this analyst up who had no idea about anything other than the things he was reading right off a page, and they got him to read 84 times. And so everyone was like, holy shit, this bitch looked up chloroform 84 times. It later came out because the defense was like, what the hell? We've never heard this once. So they investigated it. And what was actually happened here is that there was a little bit of a shift in the lines and the printing. And what was searched 84 times was MySpace, and chloroform was actually searched once on one day and once on another day. But let me give this a little bit more backstory here. So I know many of us know chloroform as the type of stuff that you soak a rag in and then you hold it over someone's face and they're out like a light, like an old-timey, say, like criminal. And it's actually found in various everyday items, from cleaning products to, like we've already discussed, cleaning products to decomposing organic material to the air we breathe to the water we drink. It's everywhere. To the chlorine in your swimming pool. There was a certain amount found in Casey's trunk, disputed. And like with all the other insignificant details of the case, the media ran with it like they stole it. On March 17th, 2008, about 3 months prior to Caylee's death, there was a search done, presumably by Casey, for chloroform on the family's computer. Then on March 21st, how to make chloroform was searched on the computer again. The prosecution made the case that Casey looked this up in premeditation, planning to kill Caylee by sedating her with chloroform and suffocating her with duct tape, which was thoroughly unsuccessful in reality, but in the media, it was a grand fucking slam. They called in their doctor from the trunk stuff, Dr. Voss, and he stated that using his own personal air sampling technique, he found shockingly high levels of chloroform in that trunk. He tested another trunk where he also found chloroform, but he said it was not nearly as high as the levels that were in Casey's trunk. And then they called in an expert with the FBI who testified that, yes, there was chloroform found in the trunk, but they didn't ask him what the levels were. So then when the defense questioned this very same expert, they asked him about the levels in the trunk, to which he responded that they were totally normal levels like you would find in any cleaning products or anything else.
This Dr. Voss individual takes a lot of things and he says these are shockingly high numbers. Well, what is the number? What is shockingly high?
Right.
What is the number that you say is shockingly high? What
Compared
is the
to
size of exactly?
Yeah.
What is the size of a human body?
Mm-hmm.
What are you saying is a shockingly high amount?
Yeah.
If you think that a shockingly high amount is the same amount as is found in cleaning supplies, then yes, that's a shockingly high amount.
Right.
However, in comparison to what? Compared to what
Right.
is my question.
Your research and your evidence is very ambiguous, dude.
Absolutely.
So what happened after this then, because they weren't really thinking clear, the prosecution had to impeach their own witness, who was the FBI expert, and they had to claim that he, who was a chemist for the FBI, was wrong, and this creep of a Dr. Voss was right. So
Good.
Cool.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Solid.
So the defense then had another witness testify that the levels in the trunk were completely normal. And while it was a hotly debated issue by both sides throughout the trial, in the end, the jury agreed with the defense that the levels of chloroform in the trunk were totally normal. So like we had said, it was initially stated that the search for chloroform was made 84 times, but it was an error and it was actually MySpace. So how the backstory for this, because when I heard this was like, oh my God. And then when I hear this, it really is very explainable. So the search had been made one time. And it was discovered that the day prior to the search, Casey's boyfriend at the time, Ricardo, had posted a meme on his MySpace that said, "Win her over with chloroform."
Good.
So he's a real winner, right? He's a delight, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
And when Casey had logged into her MySpace the following day, she clicked on Ricardo's page, saw the meme, and then immediately is when she went and looked up chloroform. So
She doesn't know what chloroform is.
no. So that really does explain it. I mean, on that day. Then later, for the couple days later, it was searched how to make chloroform. And Cindy Anthony testified in court that the second search had been done by her in regard to trying to figure out if it was okay that her dogs were eating bamboo in the backyard. So she looked up chlorophyll, which then turned to chloroform, and yada yada. But
Wait, she doesn't know that chlorophyll is just something that derives from plants?
no, she does. But regardless, because she's lying about this.
Oh.
Because the time that she claimed that she was doing the search at the house, she was at work. And it was done in the same session as a bunch of Casey's typical, like, MySpace shit. So it was probably a desperate tactic of hers to save her daughter. But in the end, this ended up, honestly, it was a whopping 3 minutes long. Both searches lasted 3 minutes long. And I don't think Casey or Cindy Anthony are geniuses. And I don't think that in these cursory searches for chloroform that they were able to gather enough, or Casey, was able to gather enough information to manufacture chloroform herself. I don't think so. You know? She didn't even know what it was. So I don't think in 3 minutes she's going to learn how to manufacture it herself. And not to mention that chloroform doesn't really work the way that we think it does, like it does in cartoons. You have to continuously be applying it to someone in order to keep them knocked out. It doesn't just knock you out and then you're out for 30 minutes. It has to be applied to your face. And you would think it would be much easier for Casey, a early 20s young lady with a bunch of friends, to find Benadryl or sleeping pills or Xanax or anything like that to get her child to be asleep, because we're not living in a 1930s crime movie. Lastly, let's keep in mind that the toxicology screen that was done on Caylee's remains came back negative, so the body didn't really have anything in it at all. Sorry to tell you, Marcus Parks. Marcus Parks thinks it's Xanax that killed Caylee, and I don't agree.
Maybe it's that connection with Zanny the nanny.
I thought that too. That was like one of my biggest things for a while. I was like, Zanny the nanny, Xanax. But there's no facts to back that up. I love you, Marcus Parks, but you just don't research as well as I do.
Oh!
Just kidding.
Uh-oh.
I'm just kidding, Ben Kissel. Come marry me, please.
So, in June of 2011, Cindy is recalled to the stand where the defense shows her a photograph of Caylee on the pool ladder. And she again mentions the ladder was in the pool on June 16th when she returned home from work that evening.
The ladder was in the fucking pool!
Adding that she called George to ask about it since she took the ladder out from the pool on the previous day after swimming with Caylee. The defense also showed the jury a picture of Caylee appearing to open a sliding glass door at her home. Cindy says Caylee was capable of opening the sliding door, like we said before, to the backyard and the pool. Lee Anthony states he was not told Casey was pregnant until days before Caylee's birth.
Fuck off.
And a search volunteer testifies about duct tape being used at search headquarters.
Sorry, George. Were you walking around with a blindfold on for 6 months?
Lee Anthony.
Oh, Lee. Okay. Sorry, Lee. Well, I don't know.
So, a Texas EquiSearch team letter discusses their November search for Caylee on their site where the body was later found. George Anthony denies that he had an affair. And here's something else about George Anthony's sexual deviance with Crystal Holloway, who was one of the searchers for Texas EquiSearch. Also that he had borrowed money from her or told her that Caylee's death was, quote, an accident that snowballed out of control.
He told this lady that it was an accident that snowballed out of control?
Mm-hmm.
Damn, dude. Okay.
He admits going to her home and sending her a text message. He testifies he bought a gun to threaten Casey's friends into telling him where Caylee was, even though he knew having one violated Casey's bail. We talked about that in episode 1, and I'm like, dude, what a lie. Yeah! What a dumb lie. Yeah. Cindy Anthony denies she sent private investigators to search the site where Caylee's body was later found. And her son, Lee Anthony, and the case's lead detective then testify she did so after talking to a psychic. Again, we talked about this episode 1, but it bears repeating.
Yeah.
Roy Kronk testifies about his calls to police and finding the body. He denies he told his son finding the body would make him rich and famous, but admits he did receive $5,000 after Caylee's remains were identified.
Oh, honey, $5,000 ain't making you rich and famous.
No.
I would love to have $5,000, but it's not making you rich and famous.
No. Judge Perry does not allow the jury to hear Casey's ex-fiancé say that Casey told him Lee had once groped her while she was sleeping.
What does it even matter?
I don't know. Cindy Anthony says Casey's response to the media theory that Caylee drowned was the surprise. Like we talked about in the first episode where I said that gave me visceral anger.
I mean, she's like, I already knew that because my dad pulled her out of the pool and brought her out to show me, and then we hit her body.
Surprise, surprise.
Right.
Baez asks George Anthony about his suicide attempt in January of 2009, and the next day the judge allows the jury to see the suicide note. Roy Cronk's son states that Kronk did say that finding Caylee Anthony would make him rich and famous. Kronk testifies about why he changed his story about lifting the skull. An expert on grief and trauma testifies that pretending nothing had happened in parting was one of the many different ways people, especially young people, express grief, which I completely understand, especially considering Casey was only 22 at the time. I'm not that much older than she was at the time.
Oh, stop bragging.
But I even have trouble dealing with grief. Like, I'd much rather forget or not even allow myself to think about or even pay attention to any pain I might be going through. Which, we've talked about that.
Well, you know what? Just wait. You just wait, because as I've gotten older, I've embraced the being weak in front of others, and I'm just going to impart that upon you, my friend.
Then Judge Perry rules that during closing arguments, the defense could argue there was a drowning involved in the death of Caylee because there was sufficient evidence of that, but could not argue George had sexually abused Casey. Prosecution does an hour and a half of closing arguments, offering a timeline of events and asserting that Casey intentionally suffocated Caylee to death by putting 3 pieces of duct tape placed over her face. The alleged motive was, like we discussed earlier, that the child interfered with her partying lifestyle and spending time with her boyfriend.
Which doesn't really make a lot of sense.
No. The prosecution states the defense story that Caylee drowned and George encouraged Casey to cover up the accident made no sense, to which the defense counters with 4 hours of arguments, insisting there was no proof of how Caylee died, challenging the prosecutor's most important evidence as, quote, fantasy, and emphasizing the reasonable doubt that Casey killed Caylee. It again insists that after the child drowned, Casey panicked and George Anthony made the death look like a murder, and he was the one who put the body into the nearby woods. Prosecutors Jeff Ashton and Linda Drain Burdick present a rebuttal to the defense closing, telling jurors their forensic evidence had proved their case, while the defense made claims they did not prove. The case then goes to jury. After about 10 hours of deliberation, the jury acquits Casey Anthony of all felony charges, i.e. of first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse, but convicts her of all of her 4 misdemeanor charges of providing false information to a law enforcement officer. I just can't help but wonder why you would create so many lies if you are innocent, but as we've established, it's a family trait, apparently. It's on the Anthony crest.
Right. I mean, yes, it is. And also, like, what in the hell? I mean, she was going through great lengths to make up these elaborate stories about stuff that was absolutely mundane. So when it comes to something as huge as her daughter accidentally dying, I mean, like I keep saying, who knows what they're capable of doing, convincing themselves of? I mean, because these people literally seem like they believe everything they're saying. They seem like they really, truly believe it.
Yeah. Then Judge Perry sentences Casey Anthony to 1 year in county jail and $1,000 in fines for each of the 4 misdemeanor counts of providing false information to law enforcement officers. The judge orders all sentences to run consecutive to each other with credit for time served, based on 3 years credit for time served plus additional credit for good behavior. Her release date is set for July 17th, 2011.
So 10 days.
So 10 days, because this was handed down on July 7th, 2011.
Right. So, and something that we'll briefly touch on, the psych evaluations that were done on Casey, there were some psychologists that believed that she was abused by her father because of the lack of emotion, the detachment, the compartmentalization, her repressed emotions in interviews. But as we have said a million times, that is all just typical Anthony behavior. And one anecdote it's not really that amazing because you should be ripping the walls down with your tears. But her boyfriend, Tony Lazaro, did testify that he woke up one night during that 31-day period to find Casey watching videos of Caylee and crying. So it does seem like perhaps she grieved in private and in front of everyone else was a happy-go-lucky little mama. And, that's probably how you would be, Bianca.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So,
no, that's exactly how
yeah.
I would be. I don't grieve. I don't grieve in front of people. I try my very damn hardest not to show any kind of weakness in front of people.
Right. But as far as the molestation charges go, or accusations, who really knows? They lie so much, who really knows? But at the same time, the reasons why any psychologist thought she had these issues was because of all this lying that she does and all this bizarre behavior that she exhibits. But like I just said, her parents both exhibit that exact same behavior. So unless they were all molested together, or not together, or separately, either
Gross.
way. Either way, unless they were all molested or they all experienced such terrible trauma that they were all coping with in this terrible way. I believe that those behaviors were learned by her from watching her fucked up parents. So I don't know that it was necessarily, I don't want to say for sure that she wasn't molested because she very well could have been. I don't know. But if anything, the weird, my brother touched my boobs stuff seems the most plausible of all of it, but who knows?
Yeah.
At the conclusion of the trial, after what was selectively obsessed about in the media, the determination that the jury came to was a fucking outrage of the highest degree. I remember, I was like, how could this blatant murderer get off that easily? Is this really a case of somebody just lying themselves to freedom? And I thought that was fucking horrible. But I think that what we as the public fail to consider in these cases is that the jury hears things that we don't hear. The jury gets a full picture with fact-based evidence being presented to them, and we're simply getting sound bites that are thrown at us by Nancy Grace and CNN and regurgitated over and over again. And as we have shown you time and time again in this exact case, that's been bullshit like crazy. They just threw bullshit at us, and I took it and I thought it was true. The jury found that the evidence that they were presented with not only didn't prove that Casey had murdered her child, but that she did not unintentionally cause the death of her child, nor did she abuse her. While following the trial, many jurors would speak publicly about their experience and their decision and state that they know Casey knew something happened to her daughter and covered it up for 31 days. They could not prove that she had any culpability for what happened or what had actually really happened to Caylee and who was involved. And while George Anthony was pretty much ignored in the media, his involvement in Caylee's death was of significant speculation to the jury for good reason. For example, I even saw an article yesterday that said, family torn apart by daughter's terrible behavior. And I was just like, is this real life?
This is real life.
Are we really ignoring the fact that this family was one giant piece of fucked up shit from the get-go?
Yeah.
If there's anything that's a major red flag of involvement in a situation like this, it is lying. And George, just like Casey, lied whenever he saw fit. And it was documented over and over again. And if he was truly an innocent party in the situation, would he even need to lie? I don't think he would. Would he have to constantly change his story? I don't think he would.
No.
The facts as they were presented and George's testimony as it was presented created suspicion as to his involvement. And this is not a story of the defense creating a scenario and cherry-picking evidence to support that like the prosecution did.
Yeah.
Unlike normal witnesses that may have incorrect recollections of events, minor details, etc., George seemingly fabricated entire scenarios down to painstaking detail, and when the claims were investigated, they were not backed up at all by anyone else or any facts whatsoever. He just made stuff up out of thin air. And in the end, despite the circumstantial evidence presented against Casey Anthony, the jurors were able to overlook the partying, the 31-day charade, and were overall convinced that Caylee's death was an accident, and furthermore, were fairly certain that George Anthony had something to do with it. One of them said, something with George Anthony. He was definitely hiding something for all the different times that he was on the stand. Something happened and he knew about it. We don't know how she died, but it probably comes down to that it was an accident, that the family did not know how to cope with it, and so instead they tried to hide it. The jury foreman said that George's involvement was definitely among the round-robin topics that they discussed in deliberation, and George had a very selective memory. They specifically said that he could remember random, supposedly mundane dates with incredible detail, but if it was something for the defense, he could not remember a thing. And they found this suspicious for good reason.
Well, yeah.
Right. The jury knew that this was one fucked up family, and that's something that the media pretty much has ignored altogether. They lied, they covered things up, they distorted the truth, and they created their own versions of reality about many things in their lives, from her graduating high school to being pregnant to having jobs to her daughter dying. All Casey's friends testified that they knew she told little white lies here and there, and her family knew that she wasn't working like she claimed. Cindy was financially supporting her through Casey's fucking thievery, though she had to have known the money was going missing because she was supporting her. And, George was at the house with her every day, like we talked about. Per the phone and internet records, he had to have known that she wasn't working. And I don't know if it's that they wanted to just let her think she was fooling them, or George and her were in cahoots, or it was that after his first time getting in trouble for telling Cindy that Casey wasn't really working where she said she was, that he decided that he had to just all out lie to her to keep their marriage intact. But it is my theory that perhaps Casey might have used Caylee as some kind of leverage with her mother, and in her doing so, Cindy was constantly terrified of upsetting her and losing access to her granddaughter, which in turn made George terrified of Cindy leaving him because of the drama going on with the family, and that he would do whatever he needed to do to keep her as happy with his lion ass as she possibly could be. Either way about it, Cindy may not have been present at the time of Caylee's death, but she lived her life in a way of willful ignorance that played a huge role in how this entire fiasco played out the way it did. In all his interviews with police, George intimates that Casey was a real constant threat to his marriage, which is something that also wasn't spoken about very much. He couldn't explain exactly why, but he did tell police that she was the reason for his separation from Cindy that happened right after Caylee was born. They did obviously get back together, but their marriage was always kind of tumultuous.
You can tell that it was completely tumultuous.
Yeah. He did have affairs and got escorts all the time, and yeah, that alone, which is also weird that he's so worried about losing her when he's doing all that, but if he sees his daughter as this threat, and maybe even he's right that she did pose a threat to their marriage just based off of all, maybe Cindy loves Caylee more, or Casey more than she loves George, because George is a piece of shit.
As a mom, I'm not a mom, yeah, but I know a lot of moms will choose their children over their husbands every day.
Yeah, right. And so he probably is right about that. But it definitely makes some sense as to why he was so ready to team up with the prosecution in her trial and pretty much just sail her down the river. But beyond that, I believe that there's more at play here regarding George and his apparent eagerness to throw her under the bus. From all records, it's pretty apparent that Caylee died when he was at the helm. So was Casey. We have no idea how it happened, but as I've stated, I believe, and I think that you've come around to that idea, not that you have to. I'm not a dictator here.
You say so.
Hey, now. I do definitely believe that there was negligence involved in an accident. A terrible fucking accident happened. I think George knew Caylee died. I think Casey knew Caylee died. And as was the typical pattern of behavior for them in these kinds of high-stress situations, and not stress situations.
Duct tape, I mean, for fuck's sake. I've never seen duct tape before in my life.
I've never buried one pet in my life.
Never.
In any situation, their typical go-to behavior was to lie, cover up the truth, and create a new reality in which they were going to live and very likely believe that it was true. What Caylee claimed was that George came running into the house carrying the dead child, and then once he testified against her in the grand jury and refused to tell what she said was the truth, she began to suspect that he must have done something to Caylee. Otherwise, why was he trying so hard to implicate her in a murder? And man, I wish I could just say, man, I believe you, because that sounds very likely, and that sounds like it fits with all the evidence that I see here. But who fucking knows? Because
knows because you're a liar.
Because you also are a lying asshole. So what happened following their getting caught up in all their lies, I really don't know. But looking at the visits to jail that George and Cindy made, sometimes I kind of got the feeling like she and George, Caylee and George, were almost having this battle of sorts. It was a silent battle where I felt like he was kind of taunting her sometimes, and maybe I'm wrong, but if he is largely responsible for what happened or partially responsible for what happened and doing everything he possibly can to throw his daughter under the bus and evade responsibility at all costs, like that's a very possible scenario here in my opinion. They could have worked together, but he, being the utter limp dick that he is, can't assume any responsibility and instead feels he has to do what he can to make sure she's found guilty and he's not. But there's also the possibility that he was trying to purposely fuck up the whole prosecution's case so that both he and Caylee were able to walk away relatively scot-free. That's a possibility. Mm-hmm. All I know is that when you're thinking about what happened to Caylee Anthony and who knew what, who did what, that the lives that these people lived before the incident, before her death, is something that you really have to consider in order to get as clear of a story as you can possibly get here. They are not normal people, and they don't act like normal people in these kinds of situations. So, like I've said a million times, who knows what the fuck their minds are capable of doing, what they're going to convince themselves is true, and what they're going to live as reality. They are absolutely, like you said at the beginning of the episode, the most bizarrely fucked up family that I've seen. Well, except for there's some serious bad ones, but okay.
Oh, there's some serious bad families that I've come across, but
this is up there.
This is up there, and this is from our time.
Yeah, right. So obviously my opinion is that Caylee is a compulsive liar. She has serious issues, serious issues, and she has issues with people wanting people to like her, just like her father. And the two of them were neglectful enough to allow something tragic to happen to Caylee Anthony, and instead of dealing with it like rational adults, they went into their crazy mode. She was wrong for handling it the way that she did, but in my opinion, she is not a cold-blooded, calculating killer. By all accounts, she was super irresponsible at times, but she loved her daughter and wasn't really even inconvenienced by her in her daily life. Conversely, George Anthony did see Caylee as a threat, and by association, maybe he saw Caylee as one too. And I'm not saying that he did anything malicious, but it's also a possibility. We never know. But the way that the media painted this entire case was way off base, and what it did was it really sensationalized what was very likely a tragic, fucked up accident that was handled like shit, but made it into something way bigger than it really ever should have been.
Which the media is wont to do.
Very much. And it really, I will say, the more I learn the truth about famous cases and stuff, I'm like, I can't trust anything that is ever presented to me on the news ever again. It's impossible. Quote unquote news.
Question everything.
Right? Not that Nancy Grace is news, but you know.
And not that we should delve into that conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Henry Zabrowski territory, but question everything.
That, I mean, for sure, there's a reason why they're doing it. It's either to be salacious as possible and get, money. That's really it. Money most of the time, money and power for whatever reason.
100%. I completely agree.
Okay, well, that is the conclusion of the Anthony family. Y'all stuck in La La Land. All right, so thank you for joining us for this long-ass episode. I know you learned new information. I hope you learned new information, and I hope you are going to tell me. I have never heard that before, and I would really appreciate to hear your thoughts about what you thought about this two-parter.
Absolutely, and hopefully you are of the same, you must be, if you listen to this show, you're of the same type of mindset where you hear additional information and you're like, I didn't know that, and you do your own research on the topic as well, and you don't just think that we are Casey Anthony sympathizers or whatever, but that there is certain evidence that was presented or not presented that the media took something that was the size of a grain of rice and said, look at this gigantic mountain.
Right. And you know, the point of the trial was to either find Casey Anthony innocent or guilty of murder or manslaughter. It wasn't to say that she hid her child's body for 31 days or whatever, you know? So you have to think about what's actually going on. So just because she sucks and she did shitty stuff doesn't mean she should be convicted. That's the word I was looking for, of murder. Take the facts into account here. And now Casey is living in Florida, working, I think, as a private investigator for, I think, maybe old Jose Baez.
I think they had a relationship or something. And don't think that she's living the good life, going to IKEA and watching movies on Tuesday nights. She's still vilified within her community.
And she's living in a house with terrible wood paneling. It looks like there's no windows. She has no natural light. And she has to fuck Jose Baez, who, while he may be a fantastic lawyer, doesn't do it for me in any way whatsoever.
No, me neither. And usually I like Latinos. All right. Anyways, yeah, thanks, guys.
Okay, you're like, it's time for me to go to bed.
For joining us. We love you. We'll see you next time.
Have a great everything. Have a great life. Bye. Creep it real.